Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This is the lesson on executing, monitoring, and controlling communications. Part 1. This lesson covers a number of communication concepts that are applicable to managing and monitoring project communications. These include communication models, choice of media, writing style, meeting management, presentations, facilitation, and active listening. The communications management knowledge area has just 3 processes: planned communications management, which we covered earlier, and the 2 that we're covering now: manage communications in the executing process group and monitor communications in the monitoring and controlling process group. Managed communications has just one primary output, and that's all of the actual project communications themselves. Monitor communications has 2 primary outputs: work performance information and change requests. We'll start with the managed communications process, which has the purpose of ensuring timely and appropriate collection, creation, distribution, storage, retrieval, management, monitoring, and ultimate disposition of project information. That's a long list, and it's been crafted carefully to include all phases of communication. Let's go through them one at a time. Collection. Information needs to be collected in order to communicate it. It starts by collecting data. There is an important distinction between data and information. Data is just the raw measurements or facts. This brings us to the creation of information, which is the process of converting data into information. Information is data that has been analyzed, compared, contrasted, synthesized, trended, graphed, charted, formatted, organized, summarized, put into infographics, and otherwise made useful for communicating insights and supporting decision-making. This information then needs to be distributed, often in the form of useful reports, which are created from information selected, organized, and formatted for specific purposes and tailored to specific audiences. Distribution itself can be a complex system of methods and tools continuously adapted to meet the needs and preferences of different stakeholder groups and even specific individual stakeholders. Storage is often overlooked, but should be considered and integrated with configuration management so that you have records of what was communicated to whom, how, and when. And it's often important to have a version history so that you can examine previous versions of documents and communications. Retrieval is also related to configuration management. It doesn't do much good to store communications without also having ways of easily retrieving this information when needed. You'll want to make sure that you provide the appropriate level of access to the right stakeholders so that they can easily access this information when they need it. Management of information is important not only for storage and retrieval, but also because it's often necessary to protect sensitive information, especially information that's protected by local laws and regulations. Personal information, such as name, address, national ID number, email address, phone number, passport number, driver's license number, birth date, birthplace, ethnicity. Financial information such as account numbers, credit card numbers, and even purchase history. And of course, medical information. All sorts of data needs all sorts of different levels and types of protection. Information security is a full-time job for some, and you may well have experts in your organization with information security in their title. People you can consult for guidance on how to manage your project's information. Monitoring can include making sure that communications are distributed as they should, that they contain what they should, that stakeholders receive, understand, and take the appropriate action, and that all the rest of the communications management processes are being followed and objectives are being met, including proper storage and disposition. And speaking of disposition, you need to determine what to do with information in the long term. How long do you need to keep it? Some things need to be kept for certain periods of time, and local laws and corporate policies will specify what are known as retention periods, which tell you not only what to keep and for how long, but also specify what must be discarded or destroyed, when and how, especially for sensitive information that may need to be disposed of securely. The basic sender-receiver model for communication is that you have a sender, a message that they want to communicate. It needs to be encoded somehow, either in writing or orally, or also through some transmission medium, such as email or a written document. That encoded message is then transmitted, and during transmission there can be noise involved. It is then received and decoded or interpreted by the receiver. Your communications should include feedback loops. One feedback loop is an acknowledgement, which is simply for the sender to know that the receiver received the message. Not necessarily that they understood it, but they at least received it. But your feedback loops should also include the ability and encouragement, when necessary, to respond and to ask questions or request more information of the sender. Your communications will often need to encourage interaction or participation. Remember that the point of communication is to engage the stakeholders in participating and in making decisions. You want to make sure that your recipients participate as needed in the discussions that should be happening, in the decisions that need to be made, and that they're taking the actions that you want them to take. To do this, you'll also need to consider the barriers to effective communication, or noise. Examples of noise or things that can interfere include a lack of relationship between the sender and receiver, or a poor relationship. Cultural differences can also be a barrier in communicating, as can technological barriers. Even language barriers, especially for those who speak multiple languages. You'll also need to consider your choice of media, what's most appropriate for which kinds of communications, and how your choice of media affects how the message is received. You have written versus oral for choice of media. When you need to communicate something with someone, is it best to get your message across and get the desired level of engagement or action by sending a report or an email? Or would it be better to have a face-to-face meeting? Or is it more urgent and you need to make a phone call or send a text message? You also need to consider formal versus informal. The more informal being things like emails or ad hoc discussions that you have in the hallway, to more formal, such as reports and presentations. You also have push versus pull. Push examples are email or phone calls, whereas examples of pull are web portals or knowledge bases. The difference being that with a push communication, you're sending something to specific individuals, or reaching out to specific individuals. Whereas with pull, you've put the information out there and recipients need to go and pull the information themselves from these portals or knowledge bases. You'll also need to choose the appropriate technology, and this will be based on stakeholder preferences, organizational or industry standards, and sometimes even on local laws and regulations that will stipulate that you need to communicate certain things in a certain way and maintain records of this for a certain period of time, and so on. The writing style you choose can also have a significant effect on how the message is received and how people respond to it. You should be familiar with different styles and be able to effectively use different styles for different types of communication and different circumstances. Using an active voice can make the message more personal and conversational, while using a passive voice can make the message more formal. Use these in the wrong contexts, and it can make you seem disrespectful on the one hand, or stuffy and unapproachable on the other. The sentence structure you choose can make your communications feel more formal or informal, and different choices of sentence structure are more appropriate for different types of communication, including written versus oral communication. And it can have quite an impact on relationships. You know that guy who always talks as if he were reading a formal report? Fancy words and complex sentence structures don't work well for informal face-to-face communication. Which brings us to word choice, which can make your communications more formal or informal. Certain words have certain connotations. Your choice of words can make connections and remind people of famous, inspiring speeches or demonstrate alignment with organizational values and goals. Idioms can remind people of whole stories and lessons. Your choice of words can be powerful symbols. However, keep in mind cultural differences when determining when to apply different styles to different situations. And when communicating using a second language, or even between different regions or groups, keep in mind that connotations and idioms will often not be understood. Most people dread meetings, and for good reason. Most meetings are not run well. Here are some best practices in meeting management that you can use to make your meetings more effective and more enjoyable. You should start by having a clear purpose for your meeting. Is it to brainstorm ideas, to do root cause analysis, share information, make a decision, build relationships? Whatever it is, make sure you know what it is and that your whole meeting is focused on achieving that objective. You should also ensure that everyone in attendance knows up front what the purpose of the meeting is. Your invitation to the meeting should specify the meeting's purpose, who needs to attend, where it will be, when, how long it will last, what participants should bring and what they should not bring, what they should do to prepare for the meeting, and you should send out any information that they need to prepare for it. You should have a meeting agenda, which you prepare in advance and include in your invitation. It should specify the steps, phases, or activities, and may include specific timeframes for each. Attendees should know exactly what to expect and be fully equipped to be productive participants. Think about who really needs to be there. All too often we invite too many people because we think they might want to be there or they might be interested in hearing what's going on. Please don't do this. This is one of the biggest reasons we dread meetings. We get invited to too many meetings that we don't really need to go to. Or we feel like we need to attend because the outcome might affect us. Instead, invite only who needs to attend, and make sure that you communicate the outcomes to those who need to know, so they don't feel like they have to attend in order to find out. Inviting too many people also trains people to think that their attendance at meetings is often optional when it's not. Which brings us to the next point. Once you've limited your invitation to those who really need to be there, make sure that they are there. If they don't show up, cancel the meeting. Reschedule it. If they really needed to be there, then you can't hold the meeting without them. If you can hold the meeting without them, then they really didn't need to be there. This will teach people that you're serious about attendance. If you cancel a meeting because an optional attendee didn't show up, then you're just being too controlling. But if you only invite essential participants, then they should understand why you can't have the meeting without them. The next best practice is to start and end your meetings on time. In some cultures, this demonstrates respect for people's time and encourages people to be on time. If you've limited your attendees to those who are essential, then you won't be able to start without them. But you can communicate ahead of time that you want to start right on time. And you should set the example by always being on time yourself and being prepared to start without delay. If you decide to start without someone, then did they really need to be there? I know that in some cultures, being strict about starting meetings on time just doesn't fit. However, in many of these cultures, it's also customary and polite to start with small talk rather than immediately diving into the meeting. If this is the case for your culture, or a meeting that you need to hold in such a culture, then why not try including the small talk as an item on the agenda? You could call it catching up, or warm up, or whatever, but start the meeting on time. Show up on time and start the small talk right away. You may still be able to start the meeting on time if you count the small talk as part of the meeting. The next is to stay on topic. Keep the focus on the meeting. If other subjects or issues come up, put them on a list, preferably on the whiteboard or somewhere that everyone can see that you're adding it to the list, and then tell everyone that you'll schedule separate meetings for those issues if needed, and then get back to the agenda for the meeting. This results in a much more productive meeting, meetings that people want to attend, and you'll be able to finish on time. Putting these items on a list is one way to manage expectations. You'll also need to manage issues and conflicts, which you should anticipate and plan for, by having a structured approach ready that you can use to work through these issues. If there are surprises and can't be resolved quickly, defer them to another meeting. One of the best ways to manage conflicts is to only invite those who are essential to the meeting. The more people you have, the more likely you are to have conflicts come up that could derail your agenda and keep you from reaching the objective of your meeting. During the meeting, someone should be taking notes, preferably not you, because you need to stay focused on leading the meeting, keeping it on track, reading the body language of the participants, and managing expectations and conflicts. Find someone else who's good at taking meeting minutes and have them do it. You should also identify actions that need to be taken and assign them to someone and set a due date right there in the moment during the meeting. These should be recorded in the meeting minutes, which should be distributed to all attendees as well as others who need this information. And very important, you need to follow up on these action items to ensure they're completed. This is the end of part 1. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed. and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.